So this is a quick introduction on Lexus needles. First off, you have the 92 to 93, sometimes early 94 SC 300 or SC 400. These are called the clear needles, or the white needles, either way, but it has the clear center housing. Next off, you have the 94 to 96 SC 300, SC 400. These are the red needles. These are different than the clear ones, so if you install these on an earlier car, they will not work. These red needles also are the same on 93 to 97 GS 300, so those are interchangeable. Then lastly, there's the 92 to 96 Lexus ES 300. These are the orange colored needles. Again, just so you're familiar with the differences between the needles. Alright, so once you remove your cluster from the car, the best method of doing this is to take the housing off, the lens and the bezel. Take a flat blade tool, screwdriver, or something plastic, and then place it under the back of the needle gently. Do not move this needle below 0, otherwise it'll mess up the calibration and the motor that drives the needle. So usually I'll pinch the tip of the needle here, place the screwdriver under the back, and then turn the screwdriver in a clockwise fashion, and the needle should just pop off. And if you're concerned about fingerprints on the gauge face, obviously wear plastic gloves, or wash your hands just prior. They're not going to be visible with the lens on there, but if you're really picky about it, you don't want anything on the gauge face, just know that if you touch this with your greasy fingers, it'll leave a smudge mark on there. So the needle's removed. This center plastic, however you want to call it, there's the center portion that mates to the center pin and the motor, and then there's two other pins that power the needle lighting. So that's the metal posts on here, and this plastic post in the middle is just how the needle mounts to the motor. If this is broken, or if you pull this off the wrong way, the center post is going to crack and break, especially if your cluster's from California or Florida or the southwestern climates that are really hot and dry. These tend to crack and break into pieces. So you may need new needles if that happens. But generally, this method is the safest, most secure way of getting needles off. Alright, the fuel and temp needles are a little bit different. These you want to go in just like this under the back. You don't want to go a twisting motion. It's going to be more of a prying or lifting motion this way to get this off. But same thing, just secure the tip of the needle here and then use the screwdriver to do most of the work and just lift it right off of there. And again, this cluster must have been from a decent climate, so these posts all look good. They're not cracked or dry or anything. And then also notice this half moon weight shape here on the bottom. This is specifically for the fuel needle. The temp needle does not have that, so make sure this needle goes back on the fuel. Again, for putting the new needles back on, you just gently press it right back on, and then that's it. The fuel needle I would mark. So if you have, if you pull your cluster out and your needle's at the halfway mark, I would put some tape down and then mark it just so you remember, because the fuel needle obviously holds its position with the car off. All the other needles go down to 0, but the fuel needle holds its position. That's the best way of quote-unquote calibrating this needle when you put it back on. Another thing to think about is the posts on the needle are square or rectangle, while the posts on the cluster are round. So that means this needle could go on 3 different positions. You could line up the round pin in the center of the rectangle, so that would probably be a half tank. You could also put this on slightly lower without moving the motor, and it'll sit somewhere in there. And then you can also put it on slightly higher by putting that pin towards the rear of the rectangle. So you're putting a small round pin into a square hole, so you have a little bit of flexibility where this goes. And the same applies for every other needle, so keep that in mind. Okay, same thing on the temperature needle, but just know that this one is designed to come back down to C. If there's any binding or resistance, or if this does not smoothly come back down, the motor is bad. It was either damaged, or just by age it goes bad, or if the needle's pulled off incorrectly, it can damage the motor. But same thing on this. Going from the back and then just slowly. Sometimes they're on there a little bit tighter, but just firm pressure will pop it straight off. Now the problem with this one, now you can see my smudges right there. If you take a cloth or something, you can usually get that off pretty well. But again, you're not going to see that with the lens on. You'll notice that this motor here falls below this stopper pin. So there's no way you can put this back on like that, because it's supposed to be up here. So the best way to do this is basically to put the cluster back in the car, get the car to operating temperature, which is usually somewhere around the middle, somewhere in here. And then once it's at operating temperature, just stick the needle right on where it's supposed to be, and then you don't have to worry about anything else or trying to turn this motor and then quickly stick the needle on while it's going down. Just that's the best way of doing it in the car without any specialized testing equipment to calibrate it. And then the same goes for mile an hour and RPM. Again, same thing. You're putting a rectangle post on a round hole. So when you put this back on, it's possible you could set it up so it's slightly below 0, slightly above 0, but you want this right on the 0 mark. So if you don't, obviously that happens, so you're a little bit below 0. So you'll want to take it off and then try to stick it on again and get that tip right at 0. And then your calibration is correct, or as close as you can possibly get. Okay, now we're going to get into the installation of the Tanin Auto Electronics version 3 Lexus needles. If you have an ES300 or a 92, 93 Lexus SC that has the clear needles, or the ES needles have the orange or tan, this is probably what you will receive. All 4 needles will look similar to this with the 2 leads already on here for you. GS and 95 and up SC will be a little bit different. I'll show you that after this. But basically, this is what we're going to do. You're going to take a side cutters that is sharp and can make good cuts. Put it directly underneath these 2 mounting posts. You see the 3 black dots, so you want this flush against them. And then in one firm snip, just cut the needle just like that. And this you can just pull out of here, throw it away, do whatever you want with it. So something important to notice is that there's 2 very small traces that come out of here that power the factory needle. If you cut this, sometimes you can pinch those 2 wires together, and then you're basically pinching both sides, and that's not good. So for the sake of demonstration here, you can use a 9-volt battery or a 12-volt power source or something that is I'm actually using a benchtop unit, and if this was shorted, the power would cut out, it would click and not supply power anymore. But this is just verifying that these two posts are not connected or shorted after cutting the needle off. I guess I can show you that. Yeah, if you touch it, it'll click and kill the power. So this is good. 9 times out of 10 when you cut it, it'll be fine, but once in a while you'll accidentally pinch the wires together. So after cutting, you'll see there's just a little ridge coming off of the post. It's like a little slope. You want to put the side cutters flat, like so, and just cut the remaining plastic so there's a nice 90-degree angle off of the post and into the needle. That's just going to allow the V3 boards to sit in there a little bit better. Okay, once that's done, you're going to want to take some thin solder, nothing crazy, and a soldering iron, and just apply a little bit of solder to each of these flat pads here. Just like that. You don't need much more than that. It's just going to be a nice area to join the leads to off of the board here. So very straightforward. Just place the needle in the empty housing, and it should pop in fairly easily. Actually, I'll make that the next portion of the video, but it should rest in there just like that. Okay, so we left off the last video with the board sitting in the housing. You can, any way you want to do this is fine. Just line up the tip with the tip of the needle. And you can use your finger. Just secure it like that. It's not going to come out very easily once you put it in there. You don't have to use glue or anything like that. This portion is going to sit just slightly higher. It's not going to affect anything. It's not going to scrape the gauge face. But it's going to sit a little bit higher than the rest of the board that's kind of sunk down into the needle housing. So after that's done, all you need to do is bend the leads just slightly down and attach them to your solder pads you constructed earlier. Don't use too much heat on this because if this metal gets too hot, it's going to melt off of the post and then you'll have problems. You shouldn't put any more heat than I just did when I showed you that. So that's it. The needle's done, ready to put back in. Simple. And then I will test it here just to show you. Again, you can also test it. I'd recommend testing it on the bench when you're done. You can use a 9-volt battery or, really anything that's less than 12 volts. And then just attach the positive lead to the right side, negative lead to the left side in this fashion. If you have the GS or the later SC 95 and up, this is going to be flipped. So we'll get into that next. If you have a 95 and up or the GS, just keep watching the video and we will get to that shortly. But here it is, powered on. They're all tested before they are shipped to you, so you should not have any bad LEDs. It will have a little bit of area in here that's not lit up. That's just due to how the board sits in the housing. Some people, you can put a little Sharpie, black Sharpie on here, or paint if you want to, paint that little space black. You can do that. It really doesn't matter. You're not going to notice it once it's installed in the cluster. This looks a little bit orange through the camera, but it's actually very deep red. The camera just has issues picking up certain colors. So this needle's done. You know how to put it back on, just straight back on. Process is the same. Mile an hour and RPM needles are exactly the same. There's no difference. So the next portion we'll do the shorter needles. Okay, actually we're going to go back to the long needle for a second. Here you can see sometimes if you cut this center part, it'll expose some of the old traces. You'll just see a little metal ring here, and then a little lead coming off of here. If that happens, I'd recommend just pulling the visible metal traces up and cutting them off. This will be the final product. You have the plastic. It's just plastic and nothing's connected to these two posts. And you don't have to worry about the old leads shorting out on the new needle board. So that's something else to keep in mind when you're cutting and getting rid of the old needle portion. So I mentioned earlier the SC, the later model SC and GS are different. They are reverse polarity. What that means is, for some reason or another, Lexus thought it would be wise to flip the positive from this side to this side and the negative over here. Why they did this, I don't know. But if that is what you ordered, your needle board will look a little bit different. We're including a little bit longer leads here to basically attach this side to this side and this side to the top side. So what I recommend and what works well is just placing this side underneath the post on this side, on the lower side. Don't worry about the top side for now. Needle goes in the same. Just pop it in with your hand, finger, whatever, screwdriver. Now, this is metal. I mean, both of these are conductive, the post and this lead on here. So you want to make sure there's a gap between what you're installing and the post. Otherwise it will short out and it won't work. But basically you need to twist this lead around however you want to do it. If you have a better way of doing it, then by all means do it that way. If you want to run them both the front way, you can do that. But this way seems to work fine. You run this one around the back, solder it to this side, and then ensure there is, like right now, this is touching, the post is touching this wire. So you'll want to bend the wire and just get it away from the post. You shouldn't have to use glue if you do it right. So that side's complete. And then as far as this side goes, usually you can touch the right side of the resistor here because it's the same. It's just this is coming off of the resistor. So just gently loop it around this way. Obviously don't touch this contact right here because that's the pin for the other side. And then something like that would probably work fine. And then just solder it to this post. This one's obviously the easier one because you don't have to worry about shorting it out to anything. But then when you install this in 95 and up SC or 95 to 96 SC, the 97's changed, or the 93 to 97 GS, this will work. The needle will work properly in your car. So it's a little bit more work, but obviously it would cost significantly more to design this board differently. So we're just providing you with enough wire here to accomplish this task. Something else you can do, I guess you could use like some kind of, they do sell liquid electrical tape. You could coat this wire in that black goop stuff and let it dry, and that would insulate this wire from the post. That's one way of doing it. But really the only thing you need to worry about is just isolating this wire from the post. Otherwise it'll short out and then you're gonna put this in and it's not gonna work. So that's the only difference with the reverse polarity needles. Process is the same for the short needles or the long needles. So we'll get back to the short needles now and finish those up. Okay, small needles are the same process. Make sure to add a little bit of solder to each of your posts. Line up the needle and press it in. There'll be a little bit of resistance. That's just the needle popping into place. Again, this back portion is going to be raised up slightly. If you don't push the board down as far as I have it here, it won't be as bad of a little angle there, or a flex, I guess you should say, and a little bit of flex in the board. So that's installed there. You can use a small flathead or something just to push the pin, not the pin, but the piece of wire down, just to hold it to the solder. So when you heat it up, it's right there. Wait for it to cool and then let go. Same thing on this side, just push the wire down a little bit, just enough so it's close enough to come into contact with solder. Again, don't use too much heat or leave the iron on here that long. So that's complete. And then I'll just test it here. Okay, there it is. Again, you can paint this little bit that's not lit up with black, or just leave it. Up to you, no big deal. Now, what we have to do on the small ones, we have to add a little bit of glue. Glue is the cheapest, easiest way of doing this. You have to add about 17 millimeters from the end of the needle to here of glue. And I'll show you how to do that. Any cheap glue gun from Harbor Freight or wherever will work just fine. But start right here and then go to the end. And the reason for this I will explain in just a second. Nothing crazy, doesn't have to be a blob of glue, just a small thin layer of glue is fine. If you hold the needle this way, you should not see any glue sticking out. Alright, so again, 17 millimeters is approximately from the end of the needle. If this board wasn't in here, if you look close at the plastic, there's 4 little marks. 1, 2, 3, 4. They're just little tabs that held the old needle in place. But it's pretty much just past the 4th needle and before the bend of the needle. So you can kind of visually see here that it's not all the way to the bend. But if you have a caliper or something, you can obviously measure 17 millimeters. Whatever works best. So the reason for this is that the weight is very close to stock, but it just needs a little bit of more weight on the front end. On the fuel, it's going to help the fuel needle stay where it last was. If this glue was not in the tip, over time the fuel needle would slowly raise up with the car off. So you don't want that. So that glue keeps it right where the fuel needle stops when the car is off. For the temp needle, this weight just helps it return down to 0 easily. Without the glue, it won't return all the way down. So with that little bit of glue, it's going to make these just like factory, and you won't have to worry about any movement issues or inability to go up or down. Or like I said with the fuel needle, it's going to stay right where you leave it with the car off. Okay, here's the final product. This has our white LED background. We have a few services that cover the needles and the rebuild of the cluster and all that. First option, you can send in your entire cluster. We'll take a look at everything, fix what needs to be fixed, kind of give you a price of what we find. It really varies. There's a lot of different problems with this cluster. We can change the odometer and the clock to blue, red, green. There's a couple different colors we can do. The needles can be red, blue, pink, purple, green, and really whatever color is available we can get, but those are the most common ones. White is another nice one. So when you put the mile an hour and RPM back on, like I was saying, the cluster. So you can purchase, obviously, the boards directly from us and install them into your own needles. You can send us your cluster. You can send us your needles, and we can do the service. As far as selling you actual needles, that's a case-by-case basis. Obviously, we can't make those. The only way to get them is to pull them out of a cluster. So that's an issue. It really depends on current stock and availability. So when you put these on, mile an hour and RPM should be right at 0. Like I mentioned before in the earlier videos, fuel, before you take this off, you should mark where this needle is. So if you're at a half a tank, you should put a little piece of tape and a marking stating that you're at a half a tank. So when you put the needle back on, you stick it right at half a tank. If you forgot to do that or didn't do that, you might be out of luck. Some people fill up the tank to full. So go to a gas station, fill it up, and then stick your needle on, because obviously you know you have a full tank of gas. So that's one way of doing that one. The temperature is a little bit different. This one you have to plug the cluster in, let the car warm up to operating temperature. Once it's at 190 or 180 degrees, stick the needle on. I believe it's somewhere in the middle. But whatever your temperature sits at when your car is normally running, that's where you should put it back on. You can do this one with the cluster powered off because it sinks down below the 0 mark when you pull the needle off. What else? That's about it. You can give us a call. You can visit our website, taninauto.com, or taninautoelectronics.com. We're on eBay, Facebook. I believe we're at facebook.com/taninautoelectronics. Really, any way you want to get a hold of us, we're here to help you out. If you need support, technical support on the needles, or these videos weren't clear enough, let us know, and we can add some follow-ups to them. But, the other thing, like I mentioned when you're putting the needles together, these needles are not painted or marked at all. Beyond the... let me try to turn the light on, see if... Okay. So you remember how I mentioned you might want to paint that extra bit that's not illuminated? Well, you really... the illumination kind of fans out to that area. So as you can see, there's really... there's no need to paint it because it's very, very small area that's not directly lit up by an LED. Like you can see in this video, it's pretty well lit to the base of the needle. So you shouldn't even really do that. I mean, it's just a waste of time and, wasting your time and all that stuff. So, yeah, don't really have much more to say. Thanks for watching, and enjoy our needles.